We are talking about demand planning for CPG brands, a topic that always comes up and has a lot of discussion around, but hard to get some like real examples of what brands are doing today in the now and as they are growing to manage that process. One of the things that I found running T-Squares is that it's constantly a balance between planning for your production operations and planning for your sales growth, especially if you're working with a contract manufacturer and only manufacturing a certain number of times per year. You really have to understand your capacity to sell, what accounts you can bring on, and how that affects the entire business. So we're going to get into those details today with our great panelists. So we have Sujit, Kunal, and Bella here with us today, and I will pass it off to them to give a quick introduction. After that, we're going to jump into some questions and hearing about their experiences of running, building, and growing their brand and how things have changed on their supply chain and sales process. And then at the end, we'll have a little bit of time for direct questions as well. At any time throughout today's presentation, if you have questions for our panelists, please go ahead and drop those into the chat, and I will ask those to our panelists as we move through here. Perfect. So let's get started. Kunal, I'd love for you to give a quick introduction about the work that you've done and that you're doing now.
Great. Well, thank you, Jordan, for having me. Hello, everyone. My name is Kunal. I head up business development for Union Crate. We are an automated AI-powered demand planning and business planning solution. So been here since September, working with a lot of brands like yourself in the CPG space, really make sense of their demand. Obviously, we live in this post-COVID world, and I'm sure a lot of you have had a huge shock to your supply chain. So, we are here to make sense of it all, automate it, make it incredibly granular, and help you guys, save time, money, resources, etc. I also co-founded my own food brand. It's called Boo, currently sold nationwide, and ran that business for almost 4 years.
Excellent. Looking forward to hearing all your tidbits there. Next, we'll have Bella.
Good morning. So I'm Bella Hughes, and I am the co-founder and president of Shaka Tea. We are a line of herbal iced teas, and we're brewed with an ancient super leaf called Mlqs, which is only found in the Hawaiian Islands. This is where I'm based, where I was born and raised. Our big commitment is to practicing sustainable and direct trade, paying small local farmers an abundant price point. We're absolutely thrilled that we're now available in close to 10,000 doors across the US, a big growth year for us. And our herbal iced teas, they're caffeine-free, gently sweetened with monk fruit. So it's a 0 calorie, 0 carb, 0 sugar product, clean label. And thanks so much for having me, Jordan. And what a joy to be speaking with Sujit and Kunal.
Perfect. And last, Sujit with Take Two Foods.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Sujit Srinivas. I am the VP of Ops and Supply Chain at Take Two Foods. We are a plant-based dairy alternative company. Well, dairy alternatives is our first line of product. There will be more down the pike. We are the world's first barley milk that's produced from upcycled spent grain from the beer brewing process. So for those of you that are familiar with the beer brewing process, once the barley goes in and all the sugars are extracted and that moves on to fermentation, to extract the alcohol, you've got this barley grain that's left over that's typically used for cattle feed or goes straight to landfill. And there's about 8 billion, that's billion with a B, pounds of spent grain going around. And that's just a, terrible waste. And it's just not sustainable for our environment or anything else. So our proposition here is we take that grain, it gets upcycled into protein-rich and fiber-rich source that we use in our barley milks. So this is the world's first, and we're super excited to be bringing it to the world. We only launched in March of 2020. Yep, that's right. Right when everything else was shutting down, we launched, and we're alive and kicking and really poised to do really well. So I would hope that you can all check it out. We're expanding in a pretty big way this year. I've only been here since the start of this year. Prior to that, I was at Craft Brew Alliance for about 7 years. Umbrella company that owned various beer brands, Kona Brewing from Hawaii, Big Island actually being one of them, along with many others. Got acquired by Anheuser-Busch, so I worked there for 3 years before leaving at the end of the year to join Take-Two. Before that, I was at Intel Corporation for about 9 years doing a mix. I started off as a research and development engineer. My background's pretty technical. Then moved over halfway to the supply chain and procurement side of things. And super excited to be here and talking to you all with this awesome panel.
Sujit, appreciate that. Let's actually start with you to learn about your experiences on this side. So with Take-Two, you're using the spent grain to make your products. How is that affecting your supply chain? How often you're giving products your ingredients, the consistency of your ingredients, and how are you kind of then processing that into the finished product?
Yeah, so as far as the spent grain goes, we actually don't take the wet spent grain and upcycle it. A company called Evergrain, which is a subsidiary of Anheuser-Busch, actually the biggest brewer that has the most spent grain. Our co-founders developed the process with them, and then Take-Two Foods spun off. And so Evergrain owns the upcycling of the spent grain to recover the protein and the fiber. And we are in constant communication with them to improve the quality of the barley protein, because it's relatively new. So there's pretty regular engagement with them to give them feedback, taking consumer insights, giving it back to them, and refining this product, as well as giving them forecasts for what we need and that sort of thing. And you mentioned consistency. That's a good point, because I mean, one of the things that, again, if you're familiar with the beer brewing process, is different types of beers use different type of barley malts and things like that. So if you make a porter, you might use a chocolate malt. If you use an amber ale, you might use something else, or pills or something else, pilsner malt or whatever else. So that changes the profile of the barley. So that consistency is really important to keep our product consistent. So with a partner like Evergrain, which is Anheuser-Busch, their parent company, churning out Budweiser, or these lighter lagers that have a super consistent same thing every time with high volumes, that ensures that the barley protein is pretty spot on each time, and you're not seeing variations in the profile.
No, that's great to hear. And then are you working with doing beverage with a third-party manufacturer to bottle everything?
Yeah, right now we don't have verticalized operations. Someday, absolutely, that's the goal. We grow to that point, but right now we do co-manufacture.
So then with that, I know you're bringing on lots of new sales accounts. How are you balancing with your team that approach to which retailers you can open up and how many doors you can enter with your ability to produce on a semi-relevant or semi-consistent basis? How do you balance those two together?
Yeah, another good and important question, especially for an early stage company. I would say that it all starts with regular, clear, transparent, and trustworthy communication between the operations team and the commercial team. It is super important that everyone is rowing the boat in the same direction, has the same ultimate goals. I mean, there's this fire and this passion to get as many accounts as you want, right off the bat. But at the same time, you have to understand that if you're a relatively early stage company, the brand may not be proven yet. So what you wouldn't want to do is have so many doors open, and then you're constantly refining and revising the product that there's just nothing to it's not consistent, or you're not able to service them because you've never factored in the capacity at your co-manufacturer or the supply or any of that. And then you start having really poor service levels and get delisted before you even start. So that, I would say, the crux of it is, an open communication between the operations and the commercial teams to understand what are the goals of the company, finding out the trajectory of growth, and then overlaying it with where we are in our product development life cycle, especially for an early stage company. If you know that there's going to be 3 or 4 revs before you really dial in the formulation, do you want to go geo-targeted, which is what we kind of did last year. We were specific to the Pacific Northwest, a little bit up and down the West Coast. And now as we're getting our formulation really dialed in, there's probably still another iteration or 2, but it's close to like dialed in. We feel confident rolling that out and having that back and forth with between ops and commercial to really understand where we are on the operational side, the supply side, all of that, and even margins, right? Like if you're well below Mlqs or all that kind of stuff, you're probably going to incur higher costs, and you want to make sure that you're doing it in a scalable way.
No, I think that's great. And I think, one thing you're really talking about is that communication between all the teams and make sure everyone's on the same page, because that's when conflict happens on any team, whether you have just one co-founder or you have a team of 5 or 10 people. If everyone's not on the same page about where you're going, what's possible, and the vision for the company and how you get there, then you're going to start getting conflicts there. So Bella, you work with a really unique ingredient as well that has deep implications for your supply chain and also your location. Talk about Shaka, your hero ingredient, how and where it's made.
Yeah, great question. So, our big why being born and raised here is that, we've got 365 days of great weather. But what many people don't realize is that Hawaii has the highest cost of living and lowest wages in the nation. And we don't have a lot of premium export crops that can then be manufactured into products that are everyday usage occasion, like Shaka Tea. I'm really proud about our accessible price point for our premium product, where our SRP is $198 to $299. And so for a long time, our ag has been very focused on like super expensive, 100%, coffee or cacao. And what we're really trying to do is build out this company that can have such an impact on, economic abundance here, especially on Hawaii Island. We practice direct trade, working with 18 family farms. We've given away, since we started, 25,000 Mlqs seedlings, because we've literally had to build the company and then build out that supply chain from scratch, which has been really interesting and very challenging, but we wouldn't be able to do what we do without, just the need. There's definitely a need that we're aiming to solve in our community here. So we couldn't grow too quickly the first couple of years, which is great, because I think the first year or two, whatever your product is on the market, you're going to do so many iterations by hearing consumer feedback, buyer feedback, of how to tweak your label or what flavor, is a little off there and can be improved. We've been able to scale and grow nationally. Really, last year we hit our stride. The beautiful thing about the Mlqs plant is that every time farmers plant it, they're actually restoring native ecosystem habitat. Like many places in the world, we've got a huge issue with just invasive species. And the Mlqs plant is actually the host plant for a pollinator butterfly. So, 2020 was originally, that was the big year for us to be like, okay, to complement broadline distribution, we're going to go DSD. Things slowed down a little bit due to COVID naturally, but now 2021, absolutely thrilled to have just launched nationally in 7-Eleven, been hitting accounts hard, and we've actually grown our team. We were only 5 people last year, and 3 of us were in Hawaii of the 5, and now we're a team of 20, and we're still hiring for a few more roles.
That is amazing. And I love that growth. So with that, though, comes the complexities on how do you make the business work and grow with you. So the Mlqs tea is grown in Hawaii, but you also process it there. But then you work with a variety of bottlers on the mainland in the States. So talk about like your supply chain and how that kind of moves through, and how you plan for inventory production, how often you're producing, and what that looks like.
Yeah, so I work with my colleague Moses Ohia, who is our local director of Hawaii Ag and Community Development, and sort of, complementing what Sujit said, like on that end, because that's the only ingredient that we can't get anywhere else. And the reason also is because historically this wasn't a crop. It grew naturally in the rainforest, in like gullies, and maybe you'd have a couple plants for your own personal usage. So we do, like any company, an annual projection, but especially for early stage companies, it's really, really critical, we've found, to actually review quarter by quarter, because you just never know where something, especially impacted by COVID last year, might be delayed. We've had new accounts be delayed as often as 12 months, or all of a sudden now in 2021, touch wood, it feels like some days we win 5 new counts a week, and they're really eager to get us on shelf much sooner than we'd anticipated. So definitely planning out that annual, where we think we're going and growing, revisiting that with our sales team and with my co-founder and husband, Harrison Rice, who actually does all the operations and logistics of the holistic production. But really big for us is we dry and process the mamaki tea leaves here in Hilo, which is where we're located on Hawaii Island, also known as the Big Island. And then we ship that lightweight material, after we're able to pay farmers a premium, to our co-packers on the West Coast. And we recently opened up co-packers on the East Coast. And I think all the other, different materials have been really critical and key, especially just with some supply chain shortages for holistic materials that you need to make a glass manufactured bottle. Harrison regularly is planning ahead and anticipating sort of what might be challenging to come by, and sitting on ample. I think it's pretty normal to talk to most beverage entrepreneurs, whether they're in cans or in glass bottles, that at any one time they're sitting on a couple million bottles, more than they need. That's a great thing to keep in stock. And yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, I think that's really great. A lot of brands, they'll have kind of one manufacturer and they're shipping everything there, but it's just interesting how, you and your team have to manage the supply chain of getting products around, because right, if you bring on a slew of new customers and you're close to running out of inventory, you can't always get line time the next week or 2 weeks. Sometimes that takes a couple months there. But I know you also said like relationships are really important to maintain the supply chain well. Can you talk about like your approach to like who you work with and your partners?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for us, I always believe like relationship first, transaction later. That's definitely, our personal ethos, which are reflected in our company and our company culture. But absolutely, if you are co-packing, the most critical relationships you have are with your co-packers. And we're in a pretty regular cadence. Definitely this year has been pretty explosive for us, but we're producing our iced tea, which is our primary product, every 2 months. Harrison has kind of a rule though. He's like, always make sure that you have 3 months of, manufactured product on hand, but engage in relationships where, like, if you needed within a 1 month turnaround notice, the ability to quickly produce another order because you just got some huge opportunity, that's possible. So, for me, my end is really more with the local, hero ingredient, the mamaki. His is with everything else, but keeping those relationships strong and being really transparent, and sharing, like, if things are coming up, this really could happen for us. Do you have extra time as we're planning out our mamaki supply chain? Talking with our farmers, ensuring that they're planting the plant matures in 6 to 12 months, as we look towards our 2022, 2023 growth goals. But I'd say besides our inner core team members on staff, anyone who is, again, co-packing, the best relationships you can have, and just that level of trust and transparency, is definitely with your co-packers, because they're part of your team. They're along for that journey to grow and scale with you.
Jordan, if I can add to that, because it's very important, because what we actually did at Boo was make our co-packer manufacturer a co-founder in our business. So they actually had equity within our company, and obviously we were able to leverage that and be able to get preferred line times, lead times that normally were, call it 3 or 4 weeks, to convert all the raw goods and components into finished goods. They would hire extra, do overtime, et cetera, for us because our success was their success. So I couldn't agree more with Bella that if you are co-packing, manufacturing your product, having that relationship with them is super important because, events like COVID can happen anytime and you have to be prepared for it. So having that relationship is super critical.
Kunal, what did it take to develop that relationship? Did you like offer the equity right off the bat, or is it like a year or two into the partnership? Like, what did that look like?
No, it was right off the bat, right? They were a big part of the development of our products too. And in all honesty, like, even if it was a Bouillon cube, there's a lot of science that goes into it. You'd be shocked. So really having their team, they had food scientists, on payroll and everything. So we really needed that help. And, when it came time to negotiating a lot of like the fees and the manufacturing terms, being able to offer up that equity as further incentive really helped when negotiating, our contract, right? And really understanding what their output was going to look like, how many pallets they can deliver at a certain time, what would happen if they didn't hit those specific lead times. So it just made it more of a partnership, right? Not just a transactional relationship. And it really helped when, we launched into a bunch of new retailers and we needed product like tomorrow. So having that type of incentive tied to a contract can really help you grow your brand, quicker and more efficiently.
And Kunal, I'll start with you in asking this, and anyone else can jump in as well. For early stage brands going to a contract manufacturer, the number one question that's asked is, how much volume are you expecting to do and how often, right? And like, all of us are really just pulling numbers out of our hat when we're just started. We're like, yeah, I'm having conversations with Whole Foods, and if we get a region at 60 stores, and if we sell through, it could be this much volume. Like, how do you recommend for early brands having those conversations to estimate or forecast like what that sale volume could be or that manufacturing volume could be to set up a good relationship with a co-manufacturer?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost is, have a plan, right? Like really understand what your sales strategy is going to look like. Do your homework. There's tons and tons of people within the CPG space. I'm sure Sajid, Bella, myself, that would be more than happy to talk to people to give them like kind of our understanding of, what are the right channels for your product, really understand your target market, and then kind of frame that in a way that you can go and actually present to your co-packer, right? Because your co-packer is also going to be successful if you are successful. I mean, they're making, whatever it is, 25, 30, 40 cents per unit. So obviously the more units that they make for you, the more money that they will make. So if you have a conversation with them, first and foremost, get an understanding of what their Mlqs are and where, what their cost structure looks like for each specific run, et cetera. And then kind of share that story with them. Well, this is what we're planning to do. A lot of brands, will launch D2C first, right? So they'll go set up their own Shopify store. They may have potential for Amazon. There's a lot more e-commerce retailers as well. And then, you're going to see a lot of that growth come from retail. So making sure you kind of have a plan in place. It doesn't have to be with an Excel with specific numbers and then you're sharing that with the actual co-packer, but do your homework, get advice, get a really good understanding of, where you're going to be selling, how much you believe you're going to be selling, what does growth look like, share that with your co-packer, and then kind of determine numbers and fit from there.
I like what you said about fit. I feel that, when you start talking to co-packers, they're all different sizes. They're really, really like, smaller, a little more artisanal co-packers. They're the medium size and the large. I think for us right now in a very high growth period after many years of a slower growth, because we had to grow out that supply chain to complement, now this opportunity nationally and internationally. We're also sold in Japan. It's been a really sweet spot in this very high growth period to be a medium sized fish in a large pond. Being the biggest fish for a smaller co-packer is the ideal situation, and being the smallest fish for what they work with other clients hasn't been ideal. So I know for us, again, that advice that has been to be that medium-sized fish if you're in a high, fast-growing sort of mode.
One thing I'll add there with the co-packer or with any other supplier for that matter is when you ask for things like terms and MOQs and all that, back to the relationship philosophy that Bella mentioned, which is 100% true. Have a conversation. Have, again, back to the communication thing. Have a conversation with them and talk to them and say, would you work with us? Because you wouldn't believe it. Like, there's so many times that I've seen that companies will just take the supplier's MOQ for what it is and say, this is not doable. But personal experience, you talk to them and say, this is how we're going to grow. You'll be surprised at the number of times they're willing to be flexible with you. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, their success is based on your success, and we're all one team. I look at it, I mean, if you look at it purely as a probability, if you don't ask, the chances of you getting it are zero. But if you ask and they say no, you're no worse off than where you were. It's still zero. But the best thing that could happen will be like, yeah, sure, we can do that. And the number of times that actually happens is more often than you would believe. So just talk to them, be open, and ask them.
Yeah, co-packers know that every brand needs to start somewhere, right? And we all know about tons and tons of brands that started out, literally selling product out of their van, making it at home, and now they are like the kinds of the world, right? So a manufacturer obviously wants to be a part of that, right? And like Sujit said, have a conversation with them, try to build that relationship up, and you'll be surprised of how many of them are willing to work with you and grow with you.
Yeah, one thing that's always interesting, when I talk to manufacturers, they often say they break even or lose money on the first couple runs, or sometimes the first year working with a new partner, as they get all the setup costs incorporated within there, along with the optimization of the run and the process. And so it's not like, manufacturers are making a ton of money on you for their first run. So that's why it's so important to find someone that you have a relationship with, that you're going to grow with, because they make money off of the volume that comes from growth into the future, not the first couple of runs. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the technology behind planning. And so, Kunal, I'll kind of come to you from your experience with Boo, how you thought about like the actual planning process, what tools that you use, and did you use like Google Sheets, and then when did that start to break for you?
Yeah. So obviously I'm pretty sure, like all founders and entrepreneurs, you're going to start out with your Excel models, right? You're going to try to build a spreadsheet that's going to kind of take in your customers and the associated velocities. You're going to be, very excited and throw some numbers out there that, it's going to show this tremendous growth. And then before you know it, you're at 24, 25 different tabs within your spreadsheet. There's tons and tons of calculations that are working through it. And now you're like sitting here being like, oh my God, when does this end, right? And, I've always been a big proponent of automation technology, because we live in a tech-forward world, and there's solutions out there that have pretty much come about because of people that have experienced the same pain points, right? So I think it was probably when I got to that 28th tab within my Excel spreadsheet, which was probably, I think around 14, 15 months into the business. And I was pretty much, updating it, I don't know, daily, probably hourly at some points. I was like, all right, this needs to stop, right? Because you tend to get to this point where, you're constantly, going after chasing these numbers. Those numbers are a huge telltale sign of where your business is going to be, but also how you're going to execute on the business too, right? Because those forecasts you're making are not just to kind of show you where the business is headed, but now you really have to, prepare for it. You have to go and purchase your raw goods components, right? You have to share those forecasts with your manufacturers, so they also have an understanding of how they need to set up their lines, their labor, all that type of stuff. Then there is a huge implication on your finances. What does your cash flow look like? I mean, I think I can speak for a lot of people here, is that, you have to potentially pay your vendors, suppliers in 30 to 60 days, and then you actually get paid by your customers, like the famous distributors, I don't know, 6 months, 12 months later, especially when you're a new product getting into new distribution. So it came to a point for me, I think it was 15 months within the business when I actually met Shastri, our founder and CEO at Union Crate, that I need some type of automation. I need someone else to do this for me. I don't care if it's a machine, I don't care if it's other people, but at least getting to a point where I didn't have to do my own Excel spreadsheet and able to utilize like a BI tool, right? And then obviously some type of AI automation on top of it. So not only does it save you a lot of time, resources, and money, those several sleepless nights get a little less also when you start implementing some tech tools.
And no, I love that kind of that transition because I went through that with T Squares as well when there's just this pain. When I think we were adding like a new channel into our model, and literally it's the same thing, had tons of tabs open and it just like wouldn't work. I had to go back and relearn how I built the formulas in order to update them all. And I was just like, this is ridiculous. So right there with you. Talk a little bit about I know you said BI, which is business intelligence, and then AI. Talk about the difference between the two and the role that each of those plays.
Yeah, so business intelligence, I mean, again, pretty much, with a BI tool, it's literally taking all of the inputs that you have and putting it into kind of this one central platform, right? Which then you can kind of utilize to slice and dice the information. There's no other data that's being applied on top of it, right? Where the AI tends to come in is all of the different data sets that exist out there, right? So consumption data, at the store level is obviously a very big thing that a lot of brands look at to really get an understanding how is a product performing and how is this going to affect my forward-looking forecast, right? So you're getting that from Nielsen, IRI, spins, all that stuff, right? Then there's obviously consumer behavior, which is a huge part of forecasting and understanding how your product is going to perform. What are the specific call outs or claims on your product or packaging that makes you different from the competition or the market? How is that resonating with the consumer, right? And then seasonality. I mean, being in the food and beverage space, we all know that every single product has some type of seasonality tied to it. There's going to be either a specific month or a specific quarter that your product is going to be heavily in demand. So now it's like, how do you take all of that information and really get it to a point where you have to get it down to one number to understand this is what my forecast is going to be for this specific month. And then you got to break that down by customer, and then you have to break it down by SKU, and then going back to customer, each customer has several different ship to locations or several different regions, and each region has its own different type of consumer base, et cetera. So it gets to a point where you just, no matter how many humans you throw at the problem, you're just not going to be able to get all of that data right together and be able to provide this output. And one thing I will say, and I'm sure that that Bella and Sajid would agree with, is that you always have to consistently figure out how to constantly improve your margins, right? We're in a low margin type of business. The distributors have extremely low margins that they're working off of, and they try to rob you sometimes of that. The retailers have incredibly low margins as well, and then you have to protect your own. So then it's trying to figure out, well, where can I make adjustments or where can I add more efficiencies that is going to directly affect my gross and net margins?
I love that. I think that's
a couple of things I'll just
go ahead,
add
Sajid.
to everything Kunal said. I mean, couldn't agree more. The importance of the thing with Excel spreadsheets is everyone, like you said, thinks differently in Excel, and everyone in the company having probably their own Excel sheet simply because they don't want to use someone else's Excel sheet because of the way it's built. It creates this sort of mass confusion of data, and the importance of a single source of truth for the entire company is super important. It does not help if the operations team is using one Excel spreadsheet with one set of demand data. Sales team is using something else for its projections. The CFO is using something else for the financial projections. It just doesn't work. And then it's no surprise that at the end of the month or whatever fiscal period, none of the things line up. But having everything in a system with a single source of truth that's built a certain way, that it's built the same way for everyone, and everyone goes to that source of truth, is just absolutely important.
I love that. I think the concept of a single source of truth where everyone's working on the same data is crucial to business. How do you go about building that? The process within your team? Does someone like own the data and they get the inputs? Like, what does that actually look like on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so I would say two important things there. Back to communication and then a system. I mean, the system would be right behind it. I would put the system just a fraction behind communication because I mean, a system would be great, but if the communication is not solid between the various key players in the company, then the system is only as good as what you put into it. So it's important to really have a level of trust between all the various groups within the company, operations, finance, commercial, whatever it is, and then a system that everyone is able to access. Um, I also like to go away from this, what I would call somewhat of an outdated concept of SNOP or sales and operation planning to more of an integrated business planning approach, where integrated business planning is SNOP is a subset of that. So demand planning, supply capacity planning, product mix, all that stuff eventually ladders up into the overall business plan, which is your financial forecast, the P&L, the cash flow statement, all of that. So the way to build that is to make sure that you're completely aligned as your financial goals, your operational capabilities, and your commercial goals. That triangulation is in sync. And there's always a little bit of tug here and there where the CFO may challenge the commercial team or the ops team and vice versa. But there again, a philosophy there is assign positive intent. Don't look at it as friction. I mean, I'm a big believer in the inherent goodness of people. Like, there's very few people in this world I would like to hope or think that come in thinking, how am I going to mess this up today? Everyone wants to do a good job. Everyone wants to rally behind each other. So assign positive intent, build that trust, have that communication, get on the same page with your overall company goals, commercial, financial, operational capabilities, everything, and then get on board with a system as soon as you can so that everything lives there. Because think about it, with these esoteric Excel sheets that different people build, there's also an opportunity cost. The amount of hours and hours per week, month, year that you're spending on tweaking an Excel formula is hours lost in running the business. So
I'm laughing because I'm just waiting, Sujit, for when you can come to Union Crate to set. You nailed it on the head, right? It's exactly what we are trying to achieve. It's breaking down those silos that for some reason exist within companies, right? It's, people having their own spreadsheets, their own formulas, their own way of doing things, and they just don't translate well within each other, right? So having a system that is taking that internal communication and the same knowledge and all that stuff, and then being able to have it in one central location. And again, each department is going to view things in a different way, right? Like finance obviously is going to be more concerned with the dollars and the cents, right? So then you need to have a system that is going to be able to show you the dollars and cents metrics, right? Then you're going to have sales that's primarily going to be concerned about cases and velocity. You're going to have supply chain that's concerned about the units and each input that goes into your bill of materials. So couldn't agree more, right? And that's what we're trying to do, and we have been doing successfully, is that first and foremost is get that information that exists, within your current system, whatever it may be, making sense of it, applying, our different AI sets and all that stuff to it, but then being able to present it in an incredible, easy to use user interface, right? That a finance team or a CFO, VP of finance can go into, VP of supply chain, COO can go into, and your sales team can also interact with. And then they speak to each other. If someone's making a change, there'll be an approval, but again, everyone's going to see the same data, and then everyone's acting off of the same data too. And I think that's the critical part, is when everyone is executing off of the same information, that's where you see the efficiency lead to high effectiveness.
Oh my gosh, that's so true, because even I'm just flashing back to conversations on my team of, we had our sales forecast of accounts we were in conversations with. They were like, all right, we're pretty sure they're going to come on board in the next month. So we need to have inventory ready so that we can supply and get that to them. And then, invariably, some of those would take longer, sometimes even 2, 3, 6 months longer to get on board. Operations is then looking and saying, like, let's look at our historicals, because the sales projections are kind of all over the place and don't always match. So let's just take an average and being close to fulfilling that. And like you said, same thing happened where we had multiple forecasts. We had a production forecast we're working on, a sales forecast, and they like kind of overlapped a little bit, but then would deviate and create headaches. So it's been a little wild.
Couple of things on that, Jordan. You mentioned all these various forecasts, and we had that in my previous company, Craft Brew Alliance. We had 3 different forecasts, and we built this. I actually helped build the process from the ground up. We had an operational forecast, like you said, historical trend analysis, all that kind of stuff. You had a sales forecast, which is based on expected points of distribution, expected velocity, that sort of stuff. And then we also had, in our case, back at Craft Brew Alliance, a wholesaler forecast or a distributor forecast, where they would forecast their own business and send it to us. So you had these 3 different things, and rarely, if ever, were they aligned. We came up internally based on some analysis and metrics with a process called a consensus forecast process, where all of these inputs go into a system, and we then look at the output of how we built this consensus forecast, and that ended up being very close to how we actually executed. Because no one's going to be right. I mean, operations tends to be more conservative. Sales might tend to be a little more optimistic. Wholesalers are somewhere else. So all of those are important data points that you put in, and the consensus forecast really helped. You also have to be careful not to get into sort of this analysis paralysis mode, but take the key inputs and coming up with a consensus forecast really helped us. Another thing you also mentioned, averages. I would say the averages are fine for super high level modeling, but beware of averages. We had a saying where we said, your head is in the oven, your feet are in the freezer, and on average, you're at 98.4 degrees. So, it doesn't help if you're stocked out on the one and overstocked on the other, and on average, your inventory is perfect. It's important to get down to the SKU level, geo level, all that stuff.
Yeah, if I could add to that, Jordan, also is another thing is that what we have learned is our CPG businesses are constantly evolving, right? They're constantly changing. There's something or the other. I used to say that would go wrong, and we would have to put out fires or whatever it is, right? So a lot of these systems that you would put in place before, it was just like, it was just one output and there was nothing really you can do about it, right? So one of the things that we really wanted to tackle here was how do we kind of utilize or leverage human intelligence, right? That artificial intelligence will never be able to pick up upon, right? So think about all of your distribution changes, right? If you're bringing on a new customer, I think Bella, you had said you're getting 5 accounts every day or something, which is awesome. Or if your team put in a last minute promotion, whatever it is, how do you really account for that and then plan for it, right? So that's why we really took it upon ourselves to get brands to be able to utilize the data that we take their knowledge and kind of layer it on top. Right. So then that will obviously then help with your planning. You'll help optimize your purchasing, your manufacturing, and logistics. So what we feel is that processes, structures, like Sujit said, right, it's only as good as what you put into it. So kind of garbage in, garbage out. But how do you keep up with it? How do you continue to improve your systems, your efficiencies, all that? So there's this huge component that we've really taken, that it's the AI means HI, and our head of demand gen, Olivia, said it best. It's this cognitive collaboration that you have between the two intelligence that I feel will continue to propel brands forward.
So I'm going to speak as the lone person who is definitely running our company on Excel. And for all those scrappy earlier stage founders, you can do that. And so, to date, what we've, and I apologize, my dogs are barking. Someone must be walking by with another dog and they're smelling them. But one of the things that's really worked for Shaka Tea has been we still to this day actually run on Excel. At the end of the day, if you're the founder and you're running your company, definitely understand the concept that people have different ways of working with Excel, but you can create an Excel sheet and you're the one that says to everyone, this is the way it works. This is the process and the formulation. And what's worked really well for us as we scale and grow is just regular communication. We outsource as an early stage, fast growing startup, really our CFO work to stage one financial. Going back to being very much like relationship driven, we have a weekly finance call to ensure that all our financials, all our cash flow, all our projections, they are spot on with our weekly review of key accounts. And we're constantly working within a probability ratio and moving things around of, oh, this account's 25%. And then because of one thing that happened, now all of a sudden it's 100 and a really quick, flip and a switch. So just speaking to any early stage companies that you can do it through Excel, but you definitely need to have someone on your team who is a mastermind at that and creating a very specific formulation and being a stickler that everyone on the company needs to use that system. Like that's the rule. So just as that lone Excel user, we still to date are running Shaka Tea on that, and we're finding it really efficient. It's just about having 2 key review meetings a week on our finance with stage one financial and then with our sales team.
And then Bella, I know we've been talking a lot about data. Also talk about the role of intuition when making these forecasts and projections.
Yeah, intuition is one of my favorite things. And I really appreciated, Sujit, how you actually started the conversation yesterday on a pre-call. But I mean, this is an incredibly kind industry, probably because there's such a high rate of failure that everybody or every other person you meet may have had a startup themselves and they're trying to share what they learned. And so, pre-pandemic, you're going to Expo West, Expo East, you're going to fancy foods, and you're going to be inundated with so much advice. And, at the end of the day, it's really important to filter that advice because no one thinks about your brand probably 20 or 22 hours in those early stage. You're not sleeping more than you, and just trusting your instinct and your gut. And I think Kunal, you said something earlier this morning that I said it should be on a t-shirt, but intuition, it's not mystical hippy dippy shit. Scientifically, intuition is because you're processing so much information at any one time that you are synthesizing it. There's a lot of really great, articles out there if you just go and, research intuitive based leadership, and you feel a way, not because of something mystical, you feel a way because you have so much pattern recognition, and who knows your brand better than you. So just a huge shout out to following your intuition and your instinct, but definitely as you're scaling and growing your brand, data is what wins the accounts. My product hasn't changed in the past 2 years. We've had the same branding, the same, proposition, but we were able to walk into 2021 showing IRI data that we're growing holistically 3 times faster than the category average and bringing new customers to the RTDT set in certain case markets where we launched that were brand new. For instance, Denver was last year, we grew 14x, and a wealth of spins data further backing up all these exciting points. And that's what's been able to win those accounts. So definitely paying for data, getting access to spins is critical with the growth.
It's the intuition experience thing is thanks Bella for that, articulating it so well. I feel like demand planning is such a great combination of art and science. On the science side, you have all the heuristics and the algorithms and the trend and everything, but it's not a substitute for that intuition and experience. I mean, just look at a couple examples in relatively recent history. The crash in 2008, 2009, where everyone thought the housing market was nothing could ever touch it. No amount of data would tell you that. And if you watch The Big Short, Michael Burry had that intuition. And guess what happened? Or the more recent, like GameStop, short squeeze and things like that. So your projections would tell you something, but there is something and you know your business best. So a healthy balance between the data and the gut, the experience, the intuition, And you have to constantly refine it and revise it. It's not a one-time thing. You got to keep doing it over and over and find the balance. There is no true balance. You got to keep finding it.
Yeah.
But I couldn't agree more about the
I want to open the
conversation.
I love that. I want to open the conversation up to questions from our audience. So definitely think of any questions that you have, type those in the chat, or make a mention that you want to raise your hand and come up on stage. We can bring you up on video. So think about those. Just last quick question for Sujit. Talk about just the simple formula that you use for demand planning and forecasting of distribution and growth, or in velocity.
Yeah, we discussed this yesterday as well. So to me, it breaks down into two. Ultimately, demand planning breaks down into two things, or at least forecasting anyway, not necessarily all of demand planning, but the forecasting piece breaks down into two variables: distribution or points of distribution, and velocity or rate of sale. Multiply those two and you have your demand. Basically, how many points of distribution you have, what's the rate of sale at each point, multiply those two and sum it across the different points of distribution. That's your demand. Of those two things, one of them is the points of distribution, which has a bigger step change because you bring on a whole bunch of accounts. That's a huge step change, but usually doesn't fluctuate that rapidly on a daily or weekly basis. It's kind of set for a given time. You have some visibility into what accounts are coming up. You may not have visibility into delisting, but hopefully no one gets delisted that frequently. So there's that. The velocity is the one that fluctuates a lot, and that's something you have to keep a close eye on. But I would say when things start to get complex, just try to go back to these first principles of distribution and velocity and break it down there. Say, how many points of distribution do you have? What do we expect the velocity to be at each after overlaying marketing promos or buy one, get ones, or whatever it is, and that's your demand. So that's the equation I use.
If I could add on to that as well, because Sujit, you opened up this webinar talking about communication internally, right? There's also a big point to be made to have external communication with the actual buyers and category managers that you're working with too. They're a wealth of information that you can utilize to really help understand what is your demand going to potentially look like. They can give you category level data, right? Or give you at least some type of expectations of what they believe you should be hitting as far as velocities and everything go. Now, don't use that to go ahead and build your entire forecast, because they obviously have to hit certain velocity numbers and certain targets as well. But you can gather a lot of this information from the actual buyers, from the actual category manager. If you're going through distributors, they can provide you with that information. And then I always say, go ahead and reach out to your competition, right? Like, competition is healthy these days. And like I said, there's a lot of people that are willing to help out. So if you even go to some people that you even aspire to be, they can give you an understanding of what their initial velocities were like for specific retailers, products, etc.
Absolutely. And I think for us, one of the success that we've had in accounts is also being very transparent and asking buyers, what does success look like for you? And then we really heavily invest with our area sales managers in the markets to beat whatever, for them, the category success is. How can we beat that by, 2 to 5 SKUs per week, if not more? So they're really transparent. And again, companies that are further along, they're always so helpful when you meet them. Hopefully we'll be meeting people in person soon, and just sharing, velocities by store, by region, by chain that have, really worked for them.
Awesome. That's a great point. So a question from the audience. Andrew has a question. Can you share some examples of demand and financial planning tools for founders that don't want to use Excel? So Kunal, you can start with, Union Crate's a really great tool. You can give like a quick plug on that, and then happy that others who have heard from to share other tools out there too.
Yeah, sure. Listen, Union Crate obviously is utilizing the AI. It's integrating with your system that's housing all of your historical information, your historical sales orders that you're getting from current customers, et cetera. And then we obviously layer on top our data sets, right? So the consumption data, consumer behavior patterns, seasonality, trade promotion. Trade promotion spends obviously are a big part of what a brand expects to do in sales, and it can be very telling. So, but there's a lot of information that you can get out of your historical sales, whether it's 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. There's a lot of patterns and trends that can be picked up from there. So yeah, for sure. Our demand planning solution, that can integrate with an ERP, et cetera.
Sujit or Bella, have you come across any other tools?
I personally have used and currently still use Excel and looking at the right systems to transition into. In the past, I've used a system called Logility, but frankly, that's quite an elaborate system and I would not recommend it for early stage companies. I've been in discussions with Kunal about this. Some of the things that we found are there's QuickBooks, which I've never used, but I know that a lot of people use it. And then there are some cloud-based, subscription-based ERP, MRP solutions out there. So there's no upfront capital outlay. They're pretty affordable, like a few $100 a month type thing. You can cancel it if you could do a free trial, cancel it. Those are there's Dear, DEAR. There's Katana, Katana. There's another one that Kunal's team, in talking to them, that was Sin7. I'll put the names of those vendors in the chat as well. So those are some that I've found, and I'm looking at this myself, but those are some that I found, and I'll just type them into the chat.
Awesome. Perfect. I just added some of those in there too. Any other questions from our audience?
I have a question if I can ask one real quick.
Go for it.
Hi, this is Michelle. I'm the founder of an e-commerce focused company. We obviously have an omnichannel presence, but I would love to know, how to demand plan for growth and scale when, it's happening and evolving so quickly, right? Because we just got off a call with someone and they're like, COVID has changed a lot of things, and going into this new era, there's a lot of behavior shifts, and we'd just love to learn, how you guys are thinking about, entering this new area, new environment, and how to plan for that growth and evolution.
This is Nikki, Michelle's co-founder, pivoting off this question as well. It's just in terms of when we have had month over month, it just doesn't seem to look the same. And so we're struggling with how to use historical to help us forecast forward when the world's changing and also just our business is growing so fast. So just adding on that.
Yeah, I would just say, based off of our expertise and what we're doing, is that there are trends and patterns that you can find within your historical sales, right? And then again, the biggest thing is that human intelligence. So you guys being able to enter in all of this new distribution that you're getting, and then you really have to understand, how does that inventory turn, or how are those velocities starting to take shape within your actual retailers, really being on top of it, right? So if you have the ability to get any type of sales reports or whatever it may be from your retailers, from your distributors, understanding those order patterns, you really need to stay on top of it. This is where I said, again, being able to kind of automate a process like this. So starting out with a BI tool where you can actually, see even a variance analysis between what was predicted, what you actually shipped out. This is all critical information that you can pull in, and then trying to understand what those trends, patterns are, any different data that you can get as well, and then try to predict forward, keeping in mind your inventory levels, et cetera.
One thing I'll say real quick on that too is just food is very seasonal by the year. And so it's hard to compare month to month for the past years, going from summer into fall or whatnot. And so I know you guys are just over a year old, so it's hard to get that full kind of annual data, but you'll see variances there. And then even on the e-com side, you don't have points of distribution, but you might have traffic to your site and your cart conversion rates. And so looking at those numbers, what's affecting them, how they're changing, to understand if you see a high influx of customers or that's rising, and what's your conversion rate, is that staying the same, and using that to start planning for demand as well.
Yeah, marketing is a big part of that, for sure.
Yeah.
You said about, and I apologize, my reception's really shoddy. I am on a kind of rural island, so it got better and I could hear everyone when I turned my camera off. But I definitely agree with kind of that quarter, whilst we weekly in these high growth, kind of uncertain, a moment of a lot of opportunity for Shaka, revisit our projections weekly just so we have that synchronicity between finance and sales team. We absolutely judge our business's health and look at patterns based on quarter, and really noting, what you just said, Jordan, just that seasonality. Of course, we sell a lot more iced tea during the warm months, but then ensuring that we're planning for that seasonal lift with, promos and getting really creative on how we're going to drive volume and sales in those winter months. And it can be something as simple, if your product isn't necessarily something quite seasonal, is coming up with really eye-catching marketing displays. We found one way that retailers really will bring you on, even if you're not like a holiday item, is if you come up with something aesthetically that looks really fun and holiday and is eye-catching for their consumers. And that's been helpful for us as we try to drive that seasonal lift in our historically quieter months, November, December.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Bella. We're coming up on time here, so we'll be wary of that. So we're going to wrap things up. Pradeep, you had a question on managing the mismatch between Mlqs and demand. We talked about that earlier in the conversation. So I'll send out the recording of this conversation here so you can watch any parts that you missed. But essentially, it was try to negotiate with the manufacturers and be honest on what you can accomplish and what you'll sell, or find an appropriately sized manufacturer to your business. You might have to grow with them over time. So thanks so much, Sujit, Kunal, and Bella for being here today. Thanks so much for everyone for listening in. If you do have follow-up questions for our panelists, feel free to shoot me an email and I can pass those along, get you in touch with the right person, and get things moving forward. So thanks so much for joining today, and everyone have a great rest of your Friday and a great weekend.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, Jordan.
All right, thanks for having us.